Discuss this further. Joining me from Washington, D.C. is Will Todman. He's a senior fellow in the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And also in Washington, D.C. is David DeRoche. He's a professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute and was the former Pentagon director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs. Welcome to you both. Will, let me start with you. So Iran has confirmed that these direct negotiations will go ahead with the US. How much hope is there that these talks will achieve real substance and avert any kind of military conflict, do you think?
There are still really important questions that we don't know the answers to. We don't know where these talks will take place. We don't know who is going to take part in them. We don't know what they're going to be discussing. Is it just going to be limited to the nuclear file, or is it going to extend to ballistic missiles, Iran's support for proxies and partners across the region as well? I think the Iranians are feeling an existential threat at the moment. It is typically their instinct to try to drag out talks for as long as possible, to buy time, to take quite a careful position. And they don't have that luxury of time at the moment. President Trump and others are imposing a quick timeline on them, which is going to force them to make some really difficult decisions.
Yeah, and David, the risk of military conflict between the US and Iran is extremely high going into these talks. We saw earlier that US Navy jet shooting down an Iranian drone in the Arabian Sea. Is that likely to rattle nerves even further? And is this drone incident a game changer at all?
Yeah, it's not a game changer. It is important. One thing you left out was earlier there was a reported attempt to board a U.S. chartered tanker, the Stena Imperative, in the Strait of Hormuz. So I think that both sides are kind of alert and are looking out for a threat. I think it's not a good time to approach each other's ships. And I think that, there is, at least in the instance of the drone shoot down, the Navy is showing that it's not going to fool around with something that comes at it. They're not going to take chances. So, yeah, there's a potential for miscalculation. There's a potential for unintended escalation.
And Will, in terms of the broader diplomacy, the White House is framing this as a commitment to diplomacy, but that all options remain on the table. Iran now seems keener than ever to make a nuclear deal. But experts say, as you pointed out, that Tehran is going to need to make some tough decisions to avert war. So how are both sides framing this, Will?
So I think it's still difficult to know because we ultimately don't know what President Trump's aims are here. We don't know if it's just to be able to say that he has come to a better deal on the nuclear file. We don't know if he's trying to bring about changes to Iran's behavior in the region. And we don't know if he's even willing to go as far as strikes that would, perhaps change the leadership in Iran or even seek regime change. I personally think he's likely to have more modest aims here, but it's difficult because he has had this huge military buildup. And I think that even for Iran to make any concessions here are something that they view as a potentially existential threat, given that they are at a historically weak position at the moment. So I think Iran is keen to limit the scope of it. They want to only talk about the nuclear file. They ideally would like to just talk with the US. They don't want other Arab states to join these talks that could expand the scope of the talks. But again, I think there are key differences here and some questions that we just don't know the answer to.
David, so how is the military situation then playing into these talks? The US has this aircraft carrier battle group sitting off the coast of Iran. Iran says, look, we've got the finger on the trigger and we're ready for war. So what are the military calculations on both sides here?
Yeah, well, there's first off, we're missing a key factor. Iran wouldn't be talking about negotiations, particularly direct negotiations, if it weren't for the military threat. But I think the military threat is here not because of anything the United States did, but because of what the Iranian people themselves did. And President Trump said that he was going to support them some way. Well, he hasn't so far. That was the real impetus to shift the carrier battle group was in the South China Sea. There's also a significant land buildup. So I think, President Trump does prefer to operate using the economic thing, and he portrays himself as the master of the art of the deal, not the art of calculated deployment of military power. But he knows, I think, that he's not going to get a deal that is favorable, a deal that is, affects what Iran has described as a red line, like enrichment of uranium on their own soil. He's not going to achieve that just out of goodwill or through superior negotiation. So I think the buildup is there, and I think it's there to ensure that some of these red lines are not so red.
Will, talk us through the substance then of what's up for discussion as far as you know. I mean, this seems, you touched on this point before, this seems to be about Iran's nuclear program. Trump's also including Iran's ballistic missile assets. What's exactly on the table, Will?
So I think those are the key parts. And it's interesting with the nuclear file, because on one level, President Trump said that he obliterated the nuclear facilities back in June in Operation Midnight Hammer. But I think the aim here is to build on that military success and have a more enduring diplomatic success that would ensure that Iran never has a pathway to nuclear weapons capabilities. So I think for President Trump, that is the key part. But as Dave said, he talked about providing support for the Iranian protesters, and limiting it just to the nuclear file doesn't support that aim. So he could be expanding it to include some aspects of changing the Iranian regime's behavior. Israel is certainly keen for the ballistic missiles to be included in these talks as well, I think, as are some Arab states in the region as well. So I think, there are different actors here that are pushing different priorities at this point, but they are all united by a feeling that Iran is at this historic weak point and that now is the time to push for greater concessions.
Yeah, and David, from the military side of things, if the Americans have the stronger hand going into these talks and they want to get to this deal, how do you see Iran playing its hand in terms of its nuclear and ballistic missile assets?
Well, what Iran has done, I don't think that there'll be a nuclear use of nuclear stuff, but I think Iran will let it be known that they are rapidly reconstituting their nuclear program if indeed it was destroyed. What we've seen is that regime surrogates and some regime officials have said, look, we're not going to suffer in isolation. If we are attacked, we are going to attack the whole region. And I've heard mentions of Trans-Caspian pipelines, infrastructure in places like Azerbaijan. One person close to the regime said the Dubai economic zone. I mean, they've basically said they're going to set the region on fire if they're attacked. So this is a very, very serious threat. And it shows that, quite frankly, Iran does not hesitate to threaten its neighbors when it feels that there's a need to do so.
Will, let's just broaden this out and talk about Iran's regional neighbors, shall we? Because many of them are already nervous about the prospect of war. These talks were supposed to happen in Turkey. They now could be moved to Oman. What is the role of Iran's neighbors, Qatar, Turkey, the Omanis and others? What's their role here in trying to de-escalate this crisis?
Well, I think they're very keen to continue these negotiations and to ensure that there is a diplomatic solution here. They are very concerned about some of the spillover effects. The list of targets that Dave just mentioned, of course, is of great concern to countries like the UAE, to Qatar, to Saudi Arabia as well. But I think they also would really worry about even the humanitarian consequences of this. If we saw large numbers of people fleeing, forcibly displaced from Iran, that's not a long way to arrive on the shores of some of the Arab Gulf states. So I think that is a concern for them as well. So they want to see the talks continue. I don't believe that the Arab Gulf states would like to see a military confrontation, at least an extended one. But I think some of them would be quite happy to see Iran's ability to threaten them going forward be reduced. And so that's why I think they are seeking in some ways to expand the scope of these talks to cover Iran's interference in their domestic political affairs, their support for non-state actors across the region, the Houthis in Yemen that, of course, threaten their economic interests, but also sometimes their security interests as well.
All right, David, let me put that question to you and get a final thought from you in terms of the regional concerns about the possibility of war. A few days ago, we saw both Saudi Arabia and the UAE say that their airspace and territory will not be used for any US military strike on Iran. How could this complicate, do you think, the US's military options and planning here?
Yeah, I agree with much of what Will said. As a matter of fact, all of what Will said. It complicates it, but it's not insurmountable. So with Midnight Hammer, the United States didn't use the airspace or really anything from its GCC partners. What we're seeing is that operations will either come from the sea or they'll be overflying Syria and Iraq, which are unable to effectively defend their airspace. So that seems to be the lines of approach. It would be faster and easier if we had base infrastructure in the GCC. And as we've seen, even if they're not used, Iran launched missiles at Qatar in the wake of Midnight Hammer, even though there was no overflight or basing out of Qatar. So there's an element of extortion here by Iran. It's basically trying to hold the GCC states hostage in order to constrain American activity. We'll see if that's a successful strategy or not.
All right, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. But thanks to Will Todman, Senior Fellow in the Middle East Programme at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and also to David DeRose, Professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute and former Pentagon Director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you both.